Concealed within the heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza is a secret, a chamber, a void, the size of a passenger jet, that for 4,500 years remained completely invisible to the human eye. It wasn't discovered with drills or dynamite. It was found in 2017 by scientists using cosmic rays, the ghostly subatomic particles that rain down from deep space, to peer through stone. We know this void is there. We can map its dimensions, but we cannot reach it. We have no idea why it was built or what it contains. The Egyptian authorities, for now, forbid any invasive exploration. It is a locked room at the center of the world's greatest mystery. But what if this empty space isn't empty at all? What if it holds the one thing that could shatter everything we thought we knew about the ancient world? The final, missing piece of a puzzle that has tormented engineers, historians, and dreamers for centuries. The answer to the question, how was the Great Pyramid really built? Because the story we've been told doesn't add up. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers are staggering. The Great Pyramid is composed of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons, the same as an SUV. But many blocks are far heavier. The granite slabs forming the roof of the king's chamber, for example, weigh up to 80 tons each. 80 tons. That's the weight of a modern battle tank. These were quarried, lifted, and transported hundreds of miles before being raised over 200 feet into the air and placed with surgical precision. And the precision is what pushes this from a marvel of engineering into the realm of the unbelievable. The entire 13-acre base of the pyramid is leveled to within less than an inch. The four sides, each over 750 feet long, are equal in length to a degree of accuracy modern construction crews would be proud of. And most baffling of all, the entire structure is aligned to true north with a precision that is frankly impossible for its time. We didn't achieve this level of accuracy again until the age of telescopes and GPS. The mainstream explanation asks us to believe that all of this, the lifting of 6 million tons of stone, the impossible precision, the perfect alignment, was achieved in roughly 20 years. All of it using simple copper chisels, stone hammers, and ropes. This is the story you'll find in most textbooks. It's a story of brute force, human ingenuity, and ramps. Lots and lots of ramps. The official narrative paints a picture of tens of thousands of skilled laborers, not slaves as Hollywood would have you believe, working tirelessly for their god king, the pharaoh Khufu. The process, as it's understood, began in quarries hundreds of miles away. In Aswan, home to the finest granite in Egypt, workers would attack the bedrock. They didn't have steel. They had dolerite, a type of rock harder than granite. They would pound the bedrock for hours, days, weeks, creating trenches around the block they wanted to excavate. Then they would carve small holes into the stone, jam wooden wedges into them, and soak the wedges with water. As the wood expanded, the pressure would build, until with a great groan, a multi-ton block would crack and split away from the earth. It was a brutal, painstaking process, and it was just the beginning. Getting these behemoths to the Giza Plateau was a challenge of its own. The 80-ton granite beams for the king's chamber had to travel over 500 miles. The solution was the Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt. The blocks were loaded onto massive wooden barges and floated north during the annual flood season, when the water levels were highest. For a long time, this was just a theory. But then, in 2013, archaeologists discovered something incredible at a port on the Red Sea. The Diary of Mir. It is the oldest surviving papyrus document in the world. And it's not a religious text or a royal decree. It's a logbook. Written by a mid-level manager named Mir, it details the day-to-day operations of his crew of 40 elite workers. He describes picking up limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura and delivering them to Giza, which he calls the horizon of Khufu. He talks about the canals they used, the food they ate, the long days. It is a stunning, humanizing glimpse into the project, providing the first eyewitness account of the pyramid's construction. It proves without a doubt that a massive state-sponsored project was underway, using the Nile as its highway. But the river only gets you to the base of the pyramid. The final and most fiercely debated part of the puzzle is the ascent. How did they lift 80-ton blocks 20 stories high? The answer, everyone agrees, must be ramps. But what kind of ramp? This is where the official story splinters into a dozen competing theories, because every single one has a fatal flaw. The most common idea is a single, long, straight ramp, extending from the front of the pyramid outwards into the desert. Simple, right? But the physics don't work. To maintain a manageable slope of around 8%, a ramp to the top of the Great Pyramid would have to be over a mile long. It would have required more material and more man-hours to build than the pyramid itself. And after the pyramid was finished, where did this colossal ramp go? There is simply no archaeological evidence that such a structure ever existed. So what about a ramp that zigzags up one of the pyramid's faces? This would use less material, but it presents new problems. The corners would be incredibly tight, making it impossible to turn a 30-foot-long granite beam. The corners would also be structural weak points, unlikely to support the immense weight of the blocks being hauled over them. This led to a more elegant and more recent theory, the internal ramp, proposed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin. This idea suggests the builders constructed a straight external ramp for the bottom third of the pyramid. Then they built an internal corkscrew-shaped ramp, like a tunnel inside a parking garage, that spiraled its way up to the top. This theory solves many problems. It explains why we don't see a giant external ramp. It was never there. It also explains small, mysterious notches found on the corners of the pyramid, which Houdin argues were used for cranes to turn the giant blocks at the corners of the internal tunnel. It's a brilliant theory. And there's a tantalizing piece of evidence. A microgravity survey in the 1980s did detect a strange, spiral-shaped anomaly of lower density inside the pyramid, right where Houdin's ramp would be. But it's not definitive proof, and so we're left with speculation. And this is where we come back to that void, that silent black space detected by cosmic rays. Houdin believes this big void is not a chamber at all. He argues it's a level, straight section of the internal ramp system, a kind of staging area or trolleyway designed to help move the massive granite beams for the king's chamber into place. If he's right, the answer to the pyramid's greatest secret has been hiding in plain sight, or rather hiding inside the structure itself. This new understanding of the workforce, powered by discoveries like the Diary of Mirror and the excavation of the workers' village, has shattered the old myth of slaves being whipped into submission. These were not slaves. They were a dedicated, well-fed, and highly organized workforce. They lived in a planned city near the pyramid. They ate the best meat, prime beef, goat, and mutton. When they were injured on the job, they received medical care. And when they died, they were granted the highest honor, burial in tombs near their pharaoh's pyramid. This was a national project, a source of pride, drawing the best craftsmen and laborers from all over Egypt for generations. But even with a skilled and motivated workforce, the fundamental problem remains. The math, the timeline. To complete the pyramid in 20 years, assuming workers labored 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, they would have had to quarry, shape, transport, and perfectly place one multi-ton block every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, without fail, for 2 decades. This timeline is so compressed, so demanding, that it pushes the limits of what seems possible with the technology they supposedly had. It leaves no room for error, no room for bad weather, no room for mistakes. And when you build something with the precision of a Swiss watch, there is no room for error. So we are left with a profound contradiction. We have eyewitness accounts of the logistics, and we have physical evidence of the workers. The official story is grounded in reality, and yet that reality seems to defy its own physical constraints. The tools don't seem to match the task. The timeline doesn't seem to match the scale. It feels like we're trying to explain how to build a supercomputer using an abacus. Is it possible we're not just missing a piece of the puzzle? Is it possible we're looking at the wrong puzzle entirely? The evidence for how they moved the stones is compelling, but the evidence for how they cut them with such impossible precision is almost non-existent. And that is where the story takes a sharp turn, into a world of lost technology, unexplained artifacts, and a truth about our own past that might be far more advanced and far stranger than we have ever been led to believe. To understand this lost technology, we first have to confront the story we've all been told, the one you learned in school. The official explanation. It involves brute force, sheer manpower, and one very, very big ramp. The idea is simple. Hundreds of thousands of workers toiled for decades, quarrying blocks of stone, dragging them on wooden sleds, and pulling them up a massive ramp that grew alongside the pyramid. On the surface, it makes a certain kind of sense. It fits our preconceived notion of ancient civilizations, primitive, but capable of incredible feats through sheer numbers and willpower. We picture legions of men, muscles straining, sweat pouring down their faces, inching these colossal stones towards the sky. It's a powerful image. But when you stop picturing it and start calculating it, the image shatters into a million pieces. Let's start with the ramp itself. For a long time, the prevailing theory was a single long straight ramp like a giant highway leading to the heavens. To get the heaviest blocks to the highest levels, engineers estimate the slope of this ramp could be no more than about 8 degrees. Any steeper, and the friction would make it impossible to pull the multi-ton blocks. An 8-degree slope to reach the pyramid's peak of 481 feet would require a ramp that was over a mile long. A mile. Think about that. A structure made of stone, mud brick, and earth, stretching for more than 5,000 feet. The volume of material needed to build this ramp would have been more than the volume of the pyramid itself. It would have been its own wonder of the ancient world. And yet, when the pyramid was finished, where did this ramp go? There is no geological scar, no mountain of leftover rubble, no trace of this mile-long structure. It simply vanished. So, Egyptologists proposed other ideas. Perhaps it was a spiral ramp, corkscrewing around the outside of the pyramid as it was built. This solves the length problem, but it creates an engineering nightmare. How do you turn a 20-foot-long, 50-ton granite beam around a sharp corner on a narrow ledge, 300 feet in the air? The physics of it are a catastrophe waiting to happen. There's also the problem of surveying. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy that modern builders would envy. How could the ancient surveyors maintain that level of precision if their lines of sight were constantly blocked by a giant ramp snaking around the entire structure? Then came the theory of the internal ramp, popularized in recent years. The idea is that the builders constructed a ramp inside the pyramid's outer casing, spiraling its way up. This is a clever theory. It explains the lack of an external ramp and might solve some logistical problems. But it's based on scant evidence, primarily a single thermal anomaly detected in a scan of the pyramid. And it doesn't even begin to address the most fundamental problem. It's not just about lifting the stones, it's about cutting them. Let's leave the Giza plateau for a moment and journey deep inside the pyramid. We climb up the narrow ascending passage, duck our heads, and emerge into the breathtaking Grand Gallery, a soaring cathedral-like corridor that leads to the very heart of the structure. At the top, we enter a small, stark room known as the King's Chamber. It is lined with massive, perfectly fitted blocks of red Aswan granite. And in the center of the room sits a simple, lidless stone box. The coffer. This coffer is the smoking gun. It's carved from a single solid block of granite. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. On the Mohs scale of hardness, diamond is a 10. Granite is a 7. The tools the ancient Egyptians supposedly had were copper chisels and dolerite pounders, a type of hard rock. Copper is a 3 on the Mohs scale. Attempting to carve a granite box with a copper chisel is like trying to carve a countertop with a sharpened piece of plastic. It's not just difficult, it's functionally impossible. But it gets even stranger. The inside of the coffer was hollowed out. How? The mainstream theory suggests workers painstakingly pounded it out, bit by bit, over an incredible length of time. But engineers and manufacturing experts who have examined the coffer, and others like it, have found evidence that points to a far more sophisticated method. They found marks inside these granite boxes that are consistent with what modern machinists call tube drills. A tube drill is a hollow cylinder that, when rotated with immense pressure and an abrasive slurry, can drill a core out of a piece of hard stone. The evidence is in the grooves. On some artifacts you can see spiral striations or tool marks left behind by the drill. By analyzing the spacing of these grooves, engineers like Christopher Dunn have calculated that to create them, the drill would have had to be advancing into the granite at a rate that is hundreds of times faster than what could be achieved by simple hand-powered rotation. It suggests a tool that was not just spinning but spinning with incredible speed and power. A power source that has been completely lost to history. And this incredible machinery wasn't just used for small coffers. Let's go back to the source. The red granite in the King's Chamber didn't come from Giza. It was quarried in Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. The relieving chambers above the King's Chamber are roofed with 9 granite beams, each weighing between 50 and 70 tons. That's the weight of a modern battle tank. How do you slice a 70-ton slab of granite from the bedrock with copper tools and stone balls? The official story is that workers would carve out trenches around the block, then possibly use wooden wedges soaked in water to expand and crack the stone free. It's a plausible method for smaller limestone blocks. For a 70-ton piece of granite, it strains credulity to its breaking point. But deep in the remote quarries of the Egyptian desert, we find evidence that is even more baffling. We find giant, abandoned obelisks and colossal blocks with strange markings on them. Not the hieroglyphs we know, but the marks of the tools that made them. In some places we find enormous curved scoop marks in the solid granite, as if a giant superheated metal spoon scraped away the rock like it was soft butter. These scoops are smooth, uniform, and show no signs of the slow, percussive chipping of a handheld pounder. They look, for all the world, like they were made by a massive, powerful machine. We are left with a profound contradiction. The civilization we see in the hieroglyphs, a world of farmers, scribes, and pharaohs using simple tools, does not match the civilization that left behind these impossible artifacts. The tool marks in the granite tell a different story. They speak of high-speed drills, immense power saws, and machines that could scoop solid rock. They whisper of a technology that is not supposed to exist. So we have to ask the question, if not ramps and copper chisels, then what? If not brute force, then what force were they using? We are looking at the evidence of a lost science, a different understanding of physics. The pyramid isn't just a pile of stones, it's a machine. And to understand how it was built, we first have to understand what it was built for. And the answer to that question will take us even further from the history we thought we knew, into the realm of sound, energy, and the hidden frequencies of the planet itself. The conventional answer, the one you'll find in every textbook, is that the Great Pyramid was a tomb, a grand, elaborate final resting place for the pharaoh Khufu. It's a simple, elegant explanation that has dominated our understanding for centuries. But like the pyramid itself, the moment you start to examine this explanation up close, cracks begin to appear. Big cracks. Because for a tomb, the Great Pyramid is missing the one thing it should absolutely have, a body. When explorers first forced their way into the heart of the pyramid, into the so-called King's Chamber, they found it almost completely empty. There was no treasure, no grave goods, no canopic jars holding the pharaoh's organs. There weren't even any hieroglyphs on the walls, no inscriptions dedicating the structure to Khufu or any other king. There was only one object, a large, stark granite box. We call it a sarcophagus, but it's unlike any other. It's undecorated, roughly finished in places, and bears no name. It's a utilitarian container, not the golden jewel-encrusted masterpiece you would expect for the most powerful man on earth. The immediate argument, of course, is grave robbers. They must have looted the pyramid in antiquity, stripping it bare. And that's certainly plausible, but it doesn't explain everything. Grave robbers are after gold, jewels, and precious metals. They aren't in the business of meticulously scrubbing every single wall clean of its inscriptions. They wouldn't steal a 100-ton mummy. And most tellingly, the granite box in the king's chamber is actually wider than the passageway leading to it. This means it had to have been placed in the chamber as the pyramid was being built around it. So if it was robbed, the thieves would have had to get the lid off, remove the mummy and all its wrappings, and then somehow get the body out through a narrow, ascending passage. It's a logistical nightmare that makes very little sense. The emptiness of the Great Pyramid is the first clue that we are looking at this structure all wrong. If it wasn't a tomb, then what was it? The answer begins not with history but with physics. It starts with the very materials the builders chose. The bulk of the pyramid is made of limestone, but the most important internal chambers, particularly the king's chamber, were built using something else entirely. Massive, precision-cut blocks of Aswan granite, quarried from over 500 miles to the south. This wasn't an arbitrary choice. Granite is an incredibly hard, durable igneous rock, but it also has a very special property. It is packed with microscopic quartz crystals, and quartz is piezoelectric. That's a scientific term that means when you put quartz under pressure, or when you make it vibrate, it generates an electric field. It converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. You use this principle every single day. The igniter on your gas grill? That's a piezoelectric crystal. The microphone you're listening to my voice on? It uses a diaphragm that vibrates, and a material that converts those vibrations into an electrical signal. The ancient builders lined the most critical chamber of the largest, most precisely engineered building on the planet with a material that is known to generate electricity when it vibrates. This cannot be a coincidence. It's a deliberate design choice. The question then becomes, what was supposed to make it vibrate? The answer might be the Earth itself. Our planet is not a silent, static ball of rock. It is alive with energy. It hums. There is a constant, low-frequency vibration that resonates in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. This is called the Schumann resonance, a planetary heartbeat thrumming at around 7.83 Hz. Below that, there are the constant, subtle microseisms, the background seismic noise of the planet. Imagine the Great Pyramid not as a static monument, but as a colossal tuning fork, designed with unimaginable precision to resonate with the natural frequencies of the Earth. Imagine it as an acoustic device, built to capture the planet's subtle vibrations and amplify them. The sheer mass of the structure, its specific geometric shape, and its orientation to true north would all contribute to its ability to couple with the Earth's energy. Once that energy is collected and amplified, it would be channeled upwards into the granite core of the machine. This is where the internal chambers come into play. They are not burial chambers. They are resonant cavities, acoustic amplifiers designed to process this energy. Acoustic engineers have actually studied the King's Chamber and found that it is a Helmholtz resonator, perfectly tuned. The dimensions of the room, the properties of the granite, and even the so-called sarcophagus itself are all part of a finely tuned acoustic system. When modern researchers have created tones inside the King's Chamber, they found that the entire room vibrates, resonating powerfully at a specific, fundamental frequency. That granite box doesn't just sit there. It rings like a bell, amplifying the sound to an incredible degree. The energy, now converted by the piezoelectric granite into an electromagnetic field, would have filled the King's Chamber. But to what end? This is where we look at another mystery, the so-called air shafts. For decades, Egyptologists believed these narrow, 4.5-inch wide shafts were designed to allow the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the heavens. But this theory has problems. For one, the shafts in the Queen's Chamber were sealed at both ends when they were discovered. And the shafts in the King's Chamber are not aligned with any significant stars from that period in a way that makes consistent sense. But what if they weren't for air or for souls? What if they were waveguides? In modern physics and engineering, a waveguide is a structure that guides waves, such as electromagnetic waves or sound, with minimal loss of energy. The precise angles and dimensions of the pyramid's shafts suddenly make sense if you see them not as symbolic passages, but as highly technical components. They could have been used to channel specific frequencies into the chambers, or to beam the processed energy out of the pyramid. This paints a picture of the Great Pyramid that is radically different from the one in our history books. It is not a monument to death. It is a machine, a geothermal seismic power plant, a device for harnessing the natural energy of the planet and converting it into a usable form. What form of energy? We don't know for sure. It could have been microwave energy, beamed out through the shafts to power a surrounding civilization. It could have been sound itself, used for purposes we can barely imagine. Or it could have been something else entirely, a form of clean wireless energy that we are only now beginning to rediscover. This idea that the pyramid was a power plant solves the mystery of the empty tomb, the choice of materials, the resonant chambers, and the purpose of the shafts. It transforms the pyramid from a primitive pile of stones into a masterpiece of physics and engineering that surpasses our own capabilities. But it also raises an even more profound question. If the ancient Egyptians built a machine of this complexity, a machine that required a deep understanding of acoustics, geology, and electromagnetism, then what kind of technology did they use to build the machine itself? If they could manipulate energy on this scale, could they also manipulate matter? The mainstream story tells us they used copper chisels and brute force to quarry and shape more than 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing up to 80 tons. But if the pyramid itself was a giant acoustic device, what if the very science it embodied was also the secret to its construction? What if they didn't just quarry the stone? What if they didn't just lift it? What if they used the hidden power of sound, the very frequencies the pyramid was built to harness, to make the impossible possible? This concept of sonic power, of acoustic levitation, it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like something pulled from a Hollywood blockbuster, not from the dusty annals of history. And for many, that's where the conversation ends. It's too strange, too radical to be taken seriously. But we're not here to accept the easy answers. We're here to ask the hard questions. And when the mainstream theories, the ones involving brute force, immense manpower, and endless ramps, still leave so many gaping holes, we have to be willing to look at the problem from a completely different angle. We have to be willing to entertain the idea that the ancient Egyptians weren't just master builders, but that they were masters of physics in a way we have yet to fully comprehend. To even begin to understand this, we need to talk about something called cymatics. It's a modern term, but the principle is as old as the universe itself. Cymatics is essentially the study of making sound visible. Imagine a thin metal plate. You sprinkle fine sand on top of it. Then you play a single pure musical tone through the plate. What happens is nothing short of magic. The seemingly random grains of sand, agitated by the vibration, begin to move. They dance and shift until they arrange themselves into a stunningly complex and perfectly symmetrical geometric pattern. Change the frequency, and the pattern instantly morphs into a new, equally intricate design. This is the fundamental truth of our reality. Sound is not just an auditory experience. It is a physical force. It is an organizing principle. It has the power to create order out of chaos. Now hold that image in your mind. A specific frequency creating a specific geometric pattern. Is it so far-fetched to think that an ancient civilization, one that was obsessed with sacred geometry and perfect alignment, might have understood this principle? That they saw the universe not as a collection of dead, inert objects, but as a symphony of vibrating energies. There are clues, strange and persistent clues, woven into the very fabric of their culture. Consider the jet pillar. It's one of the most ancient and common symbols in Egyptian mythology. We're told it represents stability, the backbone of the god Osiris. But look at it. To a modern eye, it bears a striking resemblance to a component of electrical technology. It looks like a high-voltage insulator or a Tesla coil. Some engineers have even pointed out its similarity to what's called a harmonic resonator, a device designed to vibrate powerfully when exposed to a specific frequency. Was the jet pillar merely a symbol of a god's spine? Or was it a schematic diagram for a piece of lost technology? A tool designed to tune into and amplify vibrations? Then there's the sistrum. This was a sacred musical instrument, a kind of rattle with metal discs on it, used in ceremonies for the goddess Hathor. But again, was it just for making noise? Or was it, like the jet pillar, a more sophisticated device? Researchers who have studied the acoustics of ancient temples have noted that these structures seem designed to amplify specific frequencies. The sistrum, when shaken, produces a cascade of high-frequency ultrasound, sound above the range of human hearing. Perhaps these ceremonies weren't just religious rituals. Perhaps they were technological operations, where priests or perhaps engineers used instruments like the sistrum to generate specific sonic frequencies, causing the very stone of the temples to resonate with energy. This idea of lost ancient technology isn't unique to Egypt. Think of the Baghdad Battery, a 2,000-year-old clay pot from ancient Mesopotamia that looks suspiciously like a galvanic cell, capable of producing an electric current. Or the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical calculator of such staggering complexity that its sophistication wouldn't be seen again for over 1,000 years. History is littered with these out-of-place artifacts that suggest our ancestors knew far more than we give them credit for. So what if the Egyptians had their own form of lost technology, one based not on electricity or mechanics, but on the physics of sound? This isn't just modern speculation. There are ancient accounts that describe something truly bizarre. The 10th century Arab historian and geographer, al-Masudi, wrote about the construction of the pyramids. He chronicled the local legends, the stories passed down through generations. According to these legends, the builders would place a magical papyrus, inscribed with symbols, underneath a stone block. Then they would strike the block with a specially designed metal rod, and the stone would begin to move. It would rise into the air and travel, perfectly guided, for the distance of one bowshot, before settling gently into place. A fairy tale? Almost certainly. But is it possible that this story is a mythologized account of a real technology? A distorted memory of a process that, to an outside observer, would have looked exactly like magic? A magical papyrus could be a set of instructions. A special rod could be a tool for striking a block at its precise resonant frequency. The stone wouldn't fly, but perhaps it would vibrate so intensely that it could be slid with almost no effort, floating on a cushion of agitated air and sand. And this story doesn't exist in a vacuum. Halfway across the world, in the mountains of Tibet, there is a similar, and even more detailed legend. It tells of the construction of a monastery high in the Himalayas. The story, recounted by a Swedish engineer who claimed to have witnessed it, describes Tibetan monks moving massive boulders up a cliff face. They arranged 19 musical instruments, 13 drums and 6 long trumpets, in a precise quarter-circle arc around the boulder. Then, on command, they began to play. They chanted. The sound grew into a deafening, unified crescendo. And for a few minutes, the massive stone block would allegedly rise into the air, wobbling and twisting, until it settled onto the ledge high above. Again, this is a legend. There is no hard proof. But it's fascinating that two completely separate cultures, ancient Egypt and remote Tibet, both have folklore that links the movement of massive stones to the power of sound. Where there's smoke, isn't there sometimes fire? Now let's be clear. Modern science can, in fact, levitate objects with sound. It's called acoustic levitation. In labs today, scientists can use powerful focused sound waves to suspend small drops of water or tiny particles of styrofoam in midair. The principle is real. The physics works. The problem is scale. The energy required to do this is immense. Levitation of a tiny bead takes a significant amount of power. To levitate a 2.5-ton limestone block, let alone a 70-ton granite beam, would require a catastrophic amount of sonic energy, more than a fleet of jet engines. It would shatter the stone and deafen anyone for miles. Full-on levitation, as described in the legends, seems like an impossibility with the tools we know they had. But what if we're thinking about it the wrong way? What if the goal wasn't to lift the stone completely off the ground? What if the goal was simply to make it lighter? Every object has a natural resonant frequency. If you can find that frequency and apply it to the object, you can make it vibrate with incredible energy. Think of an opera singer shattering a wine glass. She's not breaking it with brute force. She's matching its resonant frequency, causing it to vibrate so violently that its own structure fails. Now apply that to a giant stone block. You're not trying to shatter it. You're trying to energize it. By making the stone vibrate at its resonant frequency, you could dramatically reduce the friction between it and the ground. The block would essentially be bouncing thousands of times per second on a microscopic level. It would be floating on a cushion of its own vibration. It wouldn't be weightless, but the force needed to slide it across a level surface would be a tiny fraction of its actual weight. Suddenly, a small team of men instead of an army could move a multi-ton block with relative ease. This theory elegantly combines so many of our puzzle pieces. It explains the acoustic properties of the chambers. It gives a technological purpose to artifacts like the Jed pillar and the sistrum. It provides a plausible, physics-based explanation for the legends of magic and levitation recorded by historians like Al-Masudi. And it accounts for how they could move and position these colossal stones with such hair-splitting precision. They weren't just pushing dead weight. They were working with energized, vibrant matter, guiding it into place like a hovercraft on an air cushion. They weren't just building a tomb. They were building a machine made of stone, powered by the Earth's own frequency. And to understand how they built this machine, we first have to understand the blueprints. Not the blueprints drawn on papyrus, but the blueprints hidden in the stars and encoded in the very mathematics of the universe itself. The sacred geometry that dictates not just the pyramid's shape, but its true secret purpose. This geometry wasn't just about straight lines and perfect angles. It was a language, a universal language of numbers, ratios, and frequencies that the ancient architects believed was the underlying structure of reality itself. To them, to build with sacred geometry was to build a structure that resonated with the cosmos, a stone tuning fork designed to vibrate in harmony with the universe. And when we look at the Great Pyramid through this lens, the numbers that emerge are nothing short of staggering. Let's start with a number a number that's fundamental to our understanding of circles and spheres: pi, the famous 3.14. For centuries, we were taught that the ancient Greeks, like Archimedes, were the first to calculate it with any real accuracy. Yet, if you take the perimeter of the Great Pyramid at its base and divide it by twice its original height, you get a number. 3.14159. You get pi. Not a close approximation. You get pi accurate to several decimal places. Think about what this means. This relationship, the very definition of pi, is encoded into the primary dimensions of the largest, most mysterious structure on Earth. Was this an accident? A 1 in a billion fluke of construction? For a structure built with such obsessive precision, where every other detail seems meticulously planned, the idea of a coincidence on this scale becomes harder to believe than the alternative, that they knew. They knew the value of pi thousands of years before it was supposedly discovered, and they considered it so important that they immortalized it in 2.5 million blocks of stone. But pi is just the beginning. There's another. even more enigmatic number woven into the pyramid's fabric. A number artists and architects have called the divine proportion. We know it today as phi, or the golden ratio, approximately 1.618. It's a ratio found everywhere in nature, from the spiral of a seashell to the branching of trees, the veins in a leaf, and even the proportions of the human face. It's considered the most aesthetically pleasing proportion to the human eye. And it is all over the Great Pyramid. If you draw a triangle representing a cross-section of the pyramid, the ratio of the slant height to half the base length is almost a perfect expression of phi. The internal structure, particularly the king's chamber, is a symphony of golden ratio proportions. Its dimensions, length, width, and height are all interrelated through this divine number. It suggests the architects were deliberately creating a space that was in perfect mathematical harmony, a resonant chamber built according to the fundamental blueprints of life and nature itself. So we have pi, the number of the heavens, defining the pyramid's external relationship to the circle and the sphere. And we have phi, the number of life, defining its internal proportions. This isn't just architecture. This is a mathematical manifesto, a message that says, we understand the code of the universe, from the orbit of the planets to the biology of a flower, and we have enshrined it here for eternity. But to discover these incredible ratios, you first need a unit of measurement. The Egyptians used a unit called the royal cubit. And for a long time we thought it was just an arbitrary length, probably based on the forearm of some long-forgotten pharaoh. But the truth is infinitely more profound. The royal cubit is not an arbitrary human measurement. It is a terrestrial measurement. It is derived from the planet Earth itself. One royal cubit is almost exactly 1/10,000,000th of the Earth's polar radius, the distance from the center of the planet to the North Pole. Let me repeat that. Their fundamental unit of measurement was a fraction of the size of our own planet. This implies that they had performed a geodetic survey of the Earth. They knew its precise dimensions. They had to have known the planet was a sphere and had calculated its curvature and circumference with a degree of accuracy we didn't achieve again until the modern satellite era. How? How could a Bronze Age civilization possibly possess this knowledge? It's a question that shatters our entire understanding of the ancient world. They took this Earth-based measurement, the royal cubit, and they used it to build a structure whose very dimensions are a scale model of our world. For example, if you take the perimeter of the Great Pyramid in royal cubits, you get 365.24, the exact number of days in a solar year. The pyramid is not just a building. It's a calendar, an almanac, an encyclopedia of astronomical and terrestrial data. It's a scale model of the northern hemisphere of Earth, on a scale of 1 to 43,200. And that number, 43,200, isn't random either. It's directly related to a key motion of our planet known as the precession of the equinoxes, the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth on its axis. The ancients were obsessed with this grand celestial cycle, believing it governed the ages of mankind. And they encoded its mathematics directly into their greatest creation. As if encoding the blueprint of the Earth wasn't enough, they turned their gaze to the stars. The Great Pyramid is not oriented approximately to the north. It is oriented to true north with a precision that is frankly unbelievable. It is aligned within 3/60ths of a single degree. To put that in perspective, modern buildings today struggle to achieve that level of accuracy with lasers, GPS, and satellite technology. The Paris Observatory, a landmark of modern science, is off true north by a greater margin than a 4,500-year-old stone monument. This alignment is so precise that it tells us the builders had a profound, long-term understanding of astronomy. They weren't just looking at the North Star, which moves its position over centuries due to the Earth's wobble. They were mapping the heavens with a level of sophistication we are only now beginning to appreciate. But it's not just one alignment. It's the alignment of the entire Giza plateau that tells the most compelling story. For decades, people wondered why the three pyramids at Giza were not in a perfect straight line. The third and smallest pyramid, Menkaure, is slightly offset. It seemed like a strange error, a flaw in an otherwise perfect plan. But in the 1980s, a researcher named Robert Bauval looked up at the night sky and saw the answer. He wasn't looking at a map on the ground, he was looking at a map of the stars. The three pyramids of Giza are a perfect terrestrial mirror of the three stars in Orion's belt. Their size, their layout, and their positioning on the Giza plateau relative to the Nile River perfectly mimics the brightness and positioning of the three belt stars relative to the Milky Way. The flaw, the slight offset of the third pyramid was no flaw at all. It was the key. It perfectly matched the offset of the third, fainter star in Orion's belt. This is the famous Orion correlation theory. And why Orion? To the ancient Egyptians, the constellation of Orion was the celestial embodiment of their most important deity, Osiris, the god of death, resurrection, and the afterlife. The stars of Orion's belt were the gateway to the heavens, the destination for the soul of the departed pharaoh. The Egyptians believed their king would be reborn among the stars, becoming one with Osiris. Suddenly, the picture becomes terrifyingly clear. The mathematics, the sacred geometry, the geodetic knowledge, the pinpoint astronomical alignments, these were not just for show. They were functional. They were necessary components. The builders were not just creating a tomb. They were creating a gateway, a machine, a launchpad for the soul. The pyramid isn't just sitting on the earth aligned to the stars. It's a bridge, a connection point between this world and the next. The mathematics and the alignments aren't just architectural details. They are instructions. They are the coordinates for a journey from the physical to the spiritual, from death to rebirth, mirroring the journey of their god Osiris across the sky. But this raises an even more profound question. If the pyramid is a map to the stars, where exactly does it lead? And if it's a machine built with such impossible precision, what was it really designed to do? To answer that, we have to stop looking at the pyramid from the outside and venture deep within its stone heart. Because while the exterior is a map of the heavens, the interior looks less like a tomb and more like the schematics for a colossal, enigmatic engine. Let's start with the so-called air shafts in the king's and queen's chambers. For over a century, that's what Egyptologists called them. Tiny 4.5-inch square passages, angling up through hundreds of feet of solid stone to the outside. The logic seemed simple. They were for ventilation, to allow the pharaoh's soul to breathe. But this theory collapses under the slightest scrutiny. First, many of the shafts were sealed at both ends when they were discovered. Not very good for ventilation. Second, the subterranean chamber, the lowest and stuffiest part of the pyramid, has no shafts at all. And most importantly, as we discovered in the last part, these shafts are not random. They are astronomical pointers. The southern shaft of the king's chamber points directly to Orion's belt, the celestial representation of Osiris. The northern shaft points to the ancient pole star, Thuban, in the constellation Draco. These were cosmic highways, designed to guide the pharaoh's spirit to the eternal stars. But the mystery deepens. The shafts in the queen's chamber don't even reach the outside. They stop deep within the pyramid's core. For decades, no one knew what lay at their end. Then in 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a tiny, custom-built robot named Up-You-Out 2, or Opener of the Ways, on a journey up the southern shaft. For 200 feet, it crawled through the claustrophobic darkness, a journey no human had ever made. And then it came to a stop. Its camera revealed something astonishing. A small limestone door, complete with 2 copper handles. A door sealed for 4,500 years, deep inside the largest monument on Earth. What was behind it? The world waited for nearly a decade. In 2002, a new robotic mission drilled a tiny hole through the Gantenbrink door, only to find a small empty space and then another rougher door just beyond it. The mystery had only intensified. In 2011, the Jetty project, using a flexible microsnake camera, peered through the hole again. This time, they saw something that had been missed. On the floor of the tiny chamber, painted in red ochre, were hieratic symbols, markings left by the original builders. A message from the past, still waiting to be fully deciphered. These aren't air shafts. They are deliberate, complex components of a much larger design. They are like precisely engineered wires or conduits in a massive piece of circuitry. And the circuitry gets even stranger when you enter the Grand Gallery. This is arguably the most inexplicable space in the entire structure. It's not a room and it's not a hallway. It's a massive ascending corridor, 153 feet long and soaring 28 feet high, with a breathtakingly complex corbelled ceiling. It feels like the inside of a colossal stone cathedral, or perhaps the inside of a giant musical instrument. Its acoustics are phenomenal. Any sound made inside the gallery is amplified and resonates in a way that modern concert halls struggle to replicate. But the strangest feature is along the floor. On each side of a central ramp, There are 27 pairs of slots cut into the stone. Mainstream archaeology suggests these held wooden beams to help haul the granite sarcophagus up to the king's chamber. But this explanation feels weak. The engineering required to build the gallery itself dwarfs the problem of moving one stone box. What if the slots served another purpose? What if they held a series of resonators like giant tuning forks, designed to vibrate at a specific frequency? What if the entire grand gallery was a massive sound chamber, designed to collect and amplify energy? Engineer Christopher Dunn has proposed that this gallery was a power converter, filled with 27 pairs of acoustic resonators, all driven by a low-frequency vibration coming from deep within the earth. The entire gallery, he argues, was built to turn vibration into airborne sound energy. This sound energy would then be funneled directly into the most sacred and mysterious room in the entire pyramid, the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber is a masterpiece of granite construction. It's built from over 100 massive blocks of Aswan granite, some weighing over 70 tons. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all solid granite, a stone rich in quartz crystal. And inside this chamber sits the infamous granite coffer. What we've always been told is the pharaoh's sarcophagus. But again, the evidence just doesn't fit the story. The coffer is too large to have been moved through the ascending passageway. It had to have been placed inside the chamber as the pyramid was being built around it. It is the heart of the machine, placed there from the very beginning. There was no lid ever found for it, and most importantly, no mummy. No body, no treasure, no inscriptions. Nothing to suggest it was ever a tomb. What it does have is a remarkable acoustic property. If you strike the granite coffer, it doesn't just thud. It rings. It rings like a bell, emitting a deep, resonant hum. Studies have shown its primary resonant frequency is around 438 Hz. And incredibly, acoustical analysis of the King's Chamber itself shows that it is also tuned. The chamber is designed to amplify that specific frequency. The entire room is a resonance box for the coffer. So let's piece this together. We have a structure that channels seismic energy from the earth. We have a grand gallery that appears designed to convert that vibrational energy into sound. And we have a king's chamber, built of crystalline granite, that acts as a giant amplifier, focusing that sound energy onto a granite box tuned to the exact same frequency. This isn't a tomb. This is a physics experiment on a planetary scale. Christopher Dunn's theory goes even further. He proposes the pyramid was, in effect, a power plant. He suggests the so-called Queen's Chamber, located directly below the King's Chamber, was a chemical reaction chamber. The two shafts leading from it would have fed hydrated zinc and dilute hydrochloric acid, creating a volatile reaction that produced hydrogen gas. This hydrogen would fill the upper chambers, including the King's Chamber. Now imagine the sequence. The pyramid collects the natural vibrations of the earth. The Grand Gallery converts these vibrations into a powerful sonic pulse. This pulse hits the King's Chamber, which is filled with highly energized hydrogen atoms. The granite walls and coffer, vibrating at their resonant frequency, cause the quartz crystals within them to stress. This is known as the piezoelectric effect, the same principle that makes a quartz watch work. Squeezing a quartz crystal produces an electric voltage. The immense sonic and vibrational pressure on the granite walls of the King's Chamber could have created a massive piezoelectric energy release. This energy would have been absorbed by the hydrogen gas, stepping it up to a higher energy state, ultimately creating a coherent beam of microwave energy. The pyramid, according to this theory, was a gigantic maser, a microwave amplifier by stimulated emission of radiation. It was designed to harness the planet's natural energies and convert them into a powerful wireless energy beam. This is a radical departure from the history books. It suggests the builders of the Giza Plateau weren't just master masons. They were masters of physics, acoustics, and chemistry. They understood harmonic resonance and piezoelectricity. They had a technology that we are only just beginning to understand. If this is true, then every component of the pyramid has a purpose. The limestone casing wasn't just decorative, it was an insulator. The granite chambers weren't tombs, they were power cores. The shafts weren't for souls, they were for chemical inputs and stellar alignments. The entire structure was a finely tuned, active machine. A machine that has been dormant for thousands of years, sitting silently in the desert. But if the Great Pyramid was a power plant, it begs the most important question of all. What or who was it powering? And what happened to the civilization that could build such a thing? to power a civilization unlike anything we can imagine. A world without wires, without smoke, without the constant hum of machinery we've grown so accustomed to. Imagine cities bathed in a soft, ethereal light, powered by energy drawn directly from the Earth itself, broadcast wirelessly through the air. This isn't science fiction. This was the dream of one of history's greatest minds, Nikola Tesla. And it's a dream that may have been a reality thousands of years before he was ever born. Tesla envisioned a global system for the wireless transmission of energy. His Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island was the first step, a colossal transmitter designed to tap into the Earth's natural resonant frequency, turning the entire planet into a massive electrical conductor. He believed he could send power through the ground and the atmosphere to any point on the globe, providing limitless, clean, and free energy for all of humanity. His project failed, starved of funding by powerful men who couldn't figure out how to put a meter on it. But what if Tesla wasn't the inventor of this idea? What if he was a rediscoverer? Look at the Great Pyramid. It's a machine built on principles Tesla would have recognized instantly. It's a resonator, tuned to the fundamental frequencies of the planet. Its subterranean chamber, deep in the bedrock, acts as a grounding point. Its massive limestone body, an insulator. Its granite-lined chambers, piezoelectric conductors. Its missing capstone, the broadcast antenna. The theory suggests the pyramid didn't just generate power, it broadcast it. And what were the receivers? Look across the landscape of ancient Egypt. Thousands of obelisks once dotted the land. These towering, four-sided pillars were typically carved from a single piece of Aswan granite, the same piezoelectric material used inside the pyramid's chambers. And crucially, they were often topped with a pyramid-shaped capstone or pyramidion, made of electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, two of the most conductive metals known to man. These obelisks weren't just monuments. They were receivers, antennas. They would draw the ambient energy broadcast by the Giza power plant out of the atmosphere, converting it into usable, localized electricity. Smaller devices, perhaps handheld tools or lamps, could have operated on the same principle, powered by this invisible energy field. This explains the baffling lack of soot or torch marks in the deepest tombs and passages. They didn't need torches. They had light. Clean, cool, electric light. This energy could have powered more than just light bulbs. It could have powered the very tools used to create these impossible structures. Theories of acoustic levitation, of machines that could soften stone using specific frequencies, suddenly become plausible. The civilization didn't just build a power plant. The power plant enabled the civilization to build itself. It was a technological feedback loop, a society powered by a machine that powered the construction of more machines. A silent, high-tech world that left behind only stone enigmas. This paints a breathtaking picture of a lost golden age. But it leads to an unavoidable and much darker question. If they possessed such extraordinary technology, where did they go? Why did this incredible world vanish, leaving us to rediscover the basics of electricity thousands of years later? The answer, according to a growing body of evidence, is as violent as it is complete. A global cataclysm, an event so devastating it wiped the slate of human history clean. Almost every ancient culture on Earth has a memory of this event. In the West, we know it as the Great Flood, the story of Noah. The Babylonians told of Utnapishtim. The ancient Greeks spoke of Deucalion. Hindu texts describe the Matsya avatar of Vishnu saving humanity from a world-engulfing deluge. These aren't isolated fairy tales. They are the fragmented, mythologized memories of a single worldwide catastrophe, a planetary near-death experience. For decades, this idea was dismissed, but modern science is beginning to catch up with ancient myth. Geologists and climatologists have identified a period of extreme, violent climate disruption that occurred around 12,800 years ago. It's called the Younger Dryas. After thousands of years of steady warming following the last ice age, the planet was suddenly and brutally plunged back into a deep freeze. Global temperatures plummeted, ice sheets surged, and megafauna, like the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed cat, were wiped out almost overnight. What could cause such a sudden catastrophic shift? The leading theory is an impact event. Not a single giant asteroid like the one that killed the dinosaurs, but a swarm of cometary fragments, slamming into the Earth's ice caps and oceans. The evidence is etched into the soil itself, a thin, dark layer of Earth dating to precisely this period, found on multiple continents, contains nanodiamonds, melted glass spherules, and iridium, all telltale signs of a cosmic impact. The immediate effects would have been biblical. The impacts on the North American ice sheet would have vaporized trillions of tons of ice, triggering unimaginable megafloods that scoured entire continents. The superheated atmosphere would have created firestorms that burned a significant portion of the planet's biomass. The oceans would have been rocked by hypertsunamis thousands of feet high, washing over coastlines and deep into the interior of continents. And all of it would have been followed by a long dark winter, as dust and soot choked the sky, blocking out the sun for years, perhaps decades. No civilization, no matter how advanced, could survive this. Their wirelessly powered cities would be shattered by earthquakes and drowned by tidal waves. Their infrastructure would be obliterated, their population decimated. The survivors would be few, scattered, and traumatized. They would be thrown back into a primitive state, forced to focus only on survival. Their advanced knowledge of physics, astronomy, and engineering would be useless in a world where the most important skill was finding your next meal. Knowledge would become a liability. It would be forgotten or worse, deliberately suppressed. Within a few generations, the truth of their past would be gone, replaced by fractured legends of gods and deluges. The purpose of the great stone structures they left behind would be lost. The Great Pyramid would fall silent, its chambers filled with sand, its purpose a mystery. This is why the dynastic Egyptians, who rose to prominence thousands of years after this cataclysm, have no records of building the Great Pyramid. They didn't build it. They found it. They were a nascent civilization emerging from a dark age, building their new world in the shadow of a much older, much greater one they couldn't possibly comprehend. They revered the pyramids, they worshipped near them, they buried their pharaohs around them, but they were no more the builders than we are. They were simply the inheritors of a world whose operating manual had been lost to fire and flood. This cataclysm theory explains the timeline. It explains the lost technology. It explains the universal myths. It provides a clean, terrifying answer for where this lost civilization went. They didn't go anywhere. They were wiped out, and we are their descendants, suffering from a planetary amnesia. But this raises one final chilling thought. The timing is convenient. A civilization develops a technology capable of drawing immense power from the Earth's resonant field. And then the Earth itself suffers a cataclysmic spasm that resets civilization. Was it just a coincidence? A case of spectacularly bad luck? Or was it something else? Some researchers are now looking at the evidence and asking a far more disturbing question. What if the cataclysm wasn't an external event? What if the machine designed to power their world was also the weapon that destroyed it? What if the Younger Dryas impact wasn't the cause of the collapse, but the effect? This single terrifying thought reframes everything. It suggests that the architects of the Giza Plateau weren't victims of a random cosmic catastrophe. They were the authors of it. Imagine the scene. A civilization at its absolute zenith, wielding a power source that could reshape the world, a technology so advanced it bordered on magic. They had harnessed the very pulse of the Earth, turning the planet itself into a resonant circuit board. The Great Pyramid wasn't just a building. It was the master tuning fork, the central node in a global energy grid. But what happens when you push a system like that too far? Every engineer knows about harmonic resonance. You've seen the videos of a singer holding a note and shattering a crystal glass. The glass has a natural frequency. When the sound wave matches that frequency, the vibrations build upon each other, amplifying exponentially until the structural integrity of the glass fails. Now scale that principle up to the size of a planet. What if this ancient civilization, in an act of supreme confidence, or perhaps supreme desperation, tried to dial up the power? Maybe they were trying to create a planetary defense shield. Maybe they were attempting interstellar communication. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an arms race. A Cold War fought with frequencies instead of warheads, where the goal wasn't to level a city, but to detune an entire continent, to throw its climate into chaos. In this scenario, the Great Pyramid becomes the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. By manipulating the planet's resonant frequency, you could theoretically create earthquakes on the other side of the world. You could alter weather patterns, trigger volcanic eruptions, boil oceans. It's the kind of power the gods of myth were said to possess. And with great power comes the potential for a great catastrophic miscalculation. Picture a feedback loop. A small error in the energy input, a slight miscalibration in the harmonic frequency, and the system begins to overload. The energy that was meant to be broadcast wirelessly across the globe begins to build up, contained within the structure of the Giza machine itself. The granite chambers, designed to handle immense stress, begin to vibrate violently. The limestone casing, once a perfect insulator, starts to crack under the strain. The entire plateau hums with an energy it can no longer control. The planetary hum becomes a planetary scream. And then the breaking point. The system fails. But a failure in a machine of this magnitude isn't a simple power outage. It's a detonation. An explosion of energy so immense it defies modern comprehension. Not a chemical explosion like dynamite. Not even a nuclear explosion like a hydrogen bomb. This would be something else entirely. A resonant dimensional explosion, converting the very fabric of matter into pure energy. This is where the theory takes a radical, terrifying turn. The Younger Dryas impact theory points to a comet or asteroid striking the Earth, specifically the North American ice sheet, around 12,800 years ago. The evidence is compelling. A layer of nanodiamonds, melted glass spherules, and elevated iridium levels found across the globe, the classic signature of a cosmic impact. But what if the signature is correct but the source is wrong? What if the Giza machine, in its final catastrophic moments, didn't attract an object from space? What if it created one? Imagine the energy beam, no longer a controlled broadcast, but a geysering, uncontrollable pillar of force, punching straight down into the Earth's crust. It doesn't just cause an earthquake. It vaporizes and displaces millions of tons of the Earth's mantle and crust, launching it upwards with unimaginable velocity. A massive chunk of our own planet is blasted into a suborbital trajectory. It travels up through the atmosphere and into the cold vacuum of near space, glowing with incandescent heat. Then gravity takes over. This superheated mass of terrestrial rock and molten silica begins to fall back to Earth. As it re-enters the atmosphere, it fragments into thousands of pieces, just like a comet breaking apart. These fragments, now indistinguishable from meteorites, rain down across the northern hemisphere. This terrestrial impactor hypothesis explains everything the cosmic impact theory does, but without the need for a crater we can't find. The cataclysm didn't come from the outside. It was launched from within. The intense heat and pressure of the initial blast, and the subsequent atmospheric re-entry, would be more than enough to create the nanodiamonds and melted glass found in the Younger Dryas boundary layer. The iridium anomaly? Iridium is rare on the Earth's surface, but far more common in the mantle, the very place the blast would have originated. Suddenly, mysterious artifacts from around the world snap into focus. Take Libyan desert glass, a stunning, nearly pure silica glass found scattered across the Sahara. Mainstream science attributes it to a meteorite impact millions of years ago. Yet the blast pattern is strange, and the crater remains elusive. What if this glass isn't the result of an ancient impact, but is instead the vitrified sand left over from the Giza event itself, the ground zero of the energy discharge? Consider the vitrified forts of Scotland, France, and other parts of Europe. These are ancient stone hill forts whose walls have been melted into glass. Archaeologists have struggled to explain how any conventional fire could reach the 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit needed to melt solid rock on such a massive scale. But if these forts were hit by the superheated plasma fragments of a re-entering terrestrial impactor, their vitrification is not only possible but expected. They weren't burned, they were flash-broiled from the sky. This theory paints a chilling picture of the final days of this lost civilization. They weren't primitives huddling in caves watching the stars fall. They were brilliant scientists and engineers watching their greatest creation turn against them. They saw the warning signs. They knew the system was unstable, but they couldn't stop it. The very power that gave them mastery over their world became the engine of its destruction. And the survivors? Those who endured the decade-long winter, the endless rain, the mega-floods, and the darkness? They would be forever scarred by the memory. They wouldn't just lose their cities and their libraries. They would lose their faith in the very science that had elevated them. The knowledge of this energy, this resonant power, would no longer be seen as a gift. It would be a curse. A forbidden knowledge too dangerous for humanity to ever wield again. So they buried it. Not just physically but culturally. They dismantled what was left of their technology. They allowed the stories to fade into myth and legend, transforming the precise history of a technological cataclysm into cautionary tales of gods and titans, of hubris and divine punishment. The story of Atlantis, a mighty civilization swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune, might not be a myth at all. It might be a fragmented memory, a simplified, allegorical account of the day the machine broke and the world drowned. The Great Pyramid, the epicenter of this devastation, was not simply abandoned. It was decommissioned, its power source removed, its chambers sealed, its purpose deliberately obscured. It was left standing not as a monument to their glory, but as a tombstone for their entire world. A silent, solemn warning to all future ages. But a warning is only useful if it can be understood. What if the builders, in their final wisdom, encoded the nature of their failure into the very mathematics and alignment of the structures they left behind? What if the pyramid isn't just a tombstone, but a user manual, written in the universal language of numbers, telling us exactly what went wrong? To decipher this manual, we first have to learn its language. And it's not a language of hieroglyphs or symbols you can find in a museum. It's the language of the universe itself, the language of mathematics. Let's start with the number you learned in grade school. Pi, the infinite, unending constant that defines every circle in existence. If you take the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base and divide it by twice its original height, you get 3.141, an approximation of pi so accurate, it's off by less than 0.05%. Think about that. The builders encoded the fundamental constant of circles and spheres into a square-based pyramid. A coincidence? Maybe, but the manual doesn't stop there. It uses another, even more mysterious number. A number artists and architects have called the divine proportion. We know it as phi, or the golden ratio, roughly 1.618. It's the mathematical blueprint for beauty and growth, found in the spiral of a galaxy, the shell of a nautilus, and the proportions of the human face. And where do we find it in the Great Pyramid? If you take the pyramid's slant height and divide it by half the length of its base, you get a number infinitesimally close to phi. Two of the most important mathematical constants in the universe, embedded with breathtaking precision into a single stone structure. This isn't just good architecture. This is a deliberate message. This is the alphabet of the manual. It's the builders telling us, we understood the fundamental code of reality, but what were they trying to write with that alphabet? They were writing about home, about our planet. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just sitting on the Earth. In many ways, it is the Earth rendered in stone. It is a scale model of our world, with a level of accuracy that should have been impossible. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. If you take the perimeter of its base and multiply it by that same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. The margin of error for both calculations is so small it's statistically insignificant. Let this sink in. Millennia before satellites, before global navigation, before anyone even knew the Earth was a sphere that bulged at the equator, a culture we're told used copper chisels and stone hammers somehow measured the planet so precisely they could build a scale model of it. They knew its exact dimensions. They knew it wasn't a perfect sphere. And they encoded that knowledge into their greatest creation. Why the number 43,200? It's not random. It's a number deeply connected to the movement of the heavens. It's derived from one of the most important and most dangerous cycles in our planet's history, the precession of the equinoxes. Imagine the Earth spinning like a top. As it spins, it also has a very slow, subtle wobble. This wobble makes the axis of our planet draw a huge circle in the sky over a period of roughly 25,920 years, a cycle sometimes called a great year. This wobble is precession, and 43,200 is exactly 1/600th of that cycle. It is a key that unlocks the pyramid's function not just as a model of the Earth, but as a giant functioning cosmic clock. This is where the manual becomes a prophecy. Inside the pyramid, mysterious shafts angle upwards from the king's and queen's chambers. For decades, Egyptologists dismissed them as ventilation shafts, but they don't lead to the outside surface. They are aimed with laser-like precision at the sky. They are star shafts. In the 1990s, engineer Robert Bauval discovered that around the year 2500 BC, the supposed age of the pyramid, the southern shaft of the king's chamber pointed directly at Orion's belt, the celestial representation of the god Osiris. The southern shaft of the queen's chamber pointed at the star Sirius, the star of the goddess Isis. It was a perfect celestial alignment, a snapshot of the heavens in 2500 BC. Case closed, right? The pyramid is a star clock, built by the 4th dynasty Egyptians to honor their gods. But the manual has another chapter. The problem is, because of that 26,000-year precessional wobble, the stars are constantly shifting their position in the sky. Those shafts only align perfectly for a very brief window of time. But 2500 BC isn't the only time they align. If you rewind the cosmic clock, you find another date where the Giza pyramids perfectly mirror the stars of Orion's belt on the ground. A much older date, around 10,500 BC. This is the explosive core of the Orion correlation theory. The layout of the 3 pyramids on the ground is a perfect map of the 3 stars in Orion's belt. The size of each pyramid corresponds to the brightness of each star. And the Nile River next to the pyramids mirrors the Milky Way in the sky. But this perfect ground sky mirror image only happened in one moment in time, when Orion was at its lowest point in its precessional journey. That moment was 10,500 BC. Suddenly, the pyramid isn't just a tomb from 2500 BC. It's a marker, a timestamp pointing across millennia to a much more ancient, and much more dangerous, period in Earth's history. What happened around 10,500 BC? It was the end of the last ice age. A time of unimaginable global upheaval known as the Younger Dryas, where the planet was rocked by cataclysmic floods, terrifying temperature swings, and mass extinctions. A time when entire species were wiped from the face of the Earth. A time when a civilization, no matter how advanced, could have been completely erased from history. This is the warning. This is the user manual's critical message. The builders, whoever they were, weren't just mapping the planet or the stars for fun. They were mapping time itself. They understood the great cosmic cycles. They knew that the same celestial mechanics that make the stars drift across the sky also coincide with periods of profound and violent change on our planet. They experienced one of these cataclysms firsthand. And they survived, at least long enough to leave a warning for the future. They built a monument that says, "We understood the size of our planet. We understood our place in the solar system. We understood the great cycle of the stars." And it wasn't enough. They encoded the very cycle of destruction into their monument. The number 43,200 isn't just for scaling the Earth. It is a gear in the great precessional clock, ticking down to moments of creation and destruction. The pyramid isn't a tombstone celebrating a dead king. It's a warning siren, carved from 2.3 million blocks of stone. It's the story of a great failure, written into the very mathematics of the earth and sky. A message designed to survive any flood, any earthquake, any war. A message that says, what happened to us can happen to you. The question is no longer just how they built it. The question is, who were they? Who was this lost civilization with knowledge that rivals our own? A culture that could measure the globe, map the heavens, and engineer on a scale we can barely comprehend, only to be wiped from the memory of mankind. And what is the final part of their message? If the pyramid is a warning about a recurring global catastrophe, did they tell us when the great cosmic clock is set to strike again? The answer, it seems, is yes. They did tell us, but not in a language we could easily read. Not in hieroglyphs carved on a wall. They wrote their message in the language of the cosmos itself, in the silent, patient turning of the stars. To understand this message, we have to understand the grandest of all celestial cycles, the precession of the equinoxes. Imagine the Earth spinning like a top. As it spins, it also has a slow, almost imperceptible wobble. This wobble causes the North Pole to trace a huge circle in the sky over a period of roughly 26,000 years. This is the Great Year. From our perspective on Earth, this wobble means that the constellation rising behind the sun on the first day of spring changes, ever so slowly, moving backward through the 12 houses of the zodiac. Each astrological age, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, lasts for about 2,160 years. The entire Giza Plateau, it is argued, is a giant clock, built to mark the passing of these ages, and to pinpoint a specific terrifying moment in the Great Year. And the hands of this clock are the monuments themselves. Consider the Great Sphinx. For centuries, we've been told it was built by the pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BC. But there's a problem. The heavy, horizontal erosion patterns on its body, and the walls of its enclosure are not the work of wind and sand. Geologists like Dr. Robert Schoch have argued convincingly that this is classic water erosion, caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall. The last time the Giza Plateau saw that kind of rain was not in 2500 BC. It was before the Sahara became a desert more than 7,000 years ago, and perhaps as far back as 10,500 BC. And what was the Sphinx looking at in 10,500 BC? On the vernal equinox, the sun would have risen in the constellation of Leo. The Great Sphinx, a lion-bodied statue, would have gazed directly at its own celestial counterpart in the sky. A perfect alignment, perfect moment in time. The dawning of the age of Leo. This isn't a coincidence. It's a deliberate marker. The builders were telling us, this is the time we are from. This is the Zeptepi, the first time. And what happened around that time? The end of the last ice age. A period of unimaginable global cataclysm known as the Younger Dryas, where temperatures plummeted, ice sheets collapsed, and sea levels rose hundreds of feet. A period where megafauna, like the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed cat, were wiped from the face of the earth. A period where, according to Plato, the great civilization of Atlantis was lost beneath the waves. The builders of the Giza clock seem to be pointing directly to this catastrophe. They are marking the last time the clock struck midnight. But the pyramid isn't just a memorial to a forgotten apocalypse. It's a forecast. Its internal architecture, those mysterious star shafts, are part of the mechanism. We've been told they point to specific stars as they were in 2500 BC, to guide the pharaoh's soul. But what if that's just one layer of the code? What if the shafts, the corridors, and the chambers all work together with the precessional clock to pinpoint another time? A time in the future. Our time. We are now roughly halfway through the great year from that 10,500 BC starting point. We are at the opposite end of the great celestial cycle. As the age of Leo represented a beginning, our time, the shift from Pisces to Aquarius, represents a tipping point. The theory suggests that these opposite points in the cycle are the most volatile. They are periods of immense change and instability, when the Earth is most vulnerable to the cycles of the cosmos. The message wasn't for the Egyptians of 2500 BC. It was for a future civilization with the astronomical knowledge to read the clock. It was a message for us. The warning is not of a specific event, but of a recurring pattern. A vulnerability in our planetary system. Is it a solar cycle, where our sun periodically erupts in a superflare that could strip our atmosphere and boil the oceans? This would explain the need to build a structure of immense mass and durability, perhaps as a shelter or a seed bank of knowledge. The pyramid's granite coffer, the precision, the sheer resilience. It's the ultimate time capsule. Or is the threat from outside a predictable meteor stream that our solar system passes through every 13,000 years? The Taurid meteor stream, for instance, is the debris field of a giant comet that broke apart tens of thousands of years ago. We pass through its densest part twice a year. Astronomers believe that hidden within this stream are massive, dark objects, some a mile wide or more. An impact from one of these would be an extinction-level event. The Giza complex could be a giant astronomical computer, calculating the orbital mechanics of this threat and pinpointing the next likely encounter. Whatever the specific nature of the catastrophe, the pyramid is the ultimate expression of its builders' purpose. They didn't just survive a global cataclysm. They dedicated their entire existence to ensuring the next civilization would be warned. They encoded their message in mathematics, the universal language. They built their messenger out of stone, the most enduring material. They aligned it with the stars, the most reliable timepiece. But perhaps it's more than just a warning. Perhaps it's also a gift. A legacy. Think about everything we've uncovered. The perfect encoding of pi and phi. The precise measurements of our planet. The potential for harmonic resonance and energy generation. This isn't just a gravestone for a lost world. It's a cornerstone for a new one. It's a user's manual for civilization, left behind by a people who understood the fundamental laws of the universe in a way we are only just beginning to grasp. They left us the keys to restarting the world, hoping we would be wise enough to use them not for power or for greed, but for survival and enlightenment. So, how was the Great Pyramid really built? We began this journey with questions of ramps and ropes, of manpower and simple tools. But we ended in a place far beyond that. The pyramid was built with a knowledge of science, astronomy, and mathematics that is both ancient and futuristic. It was built with a technology we cannot replicate and a purpose we can barely comprehend. And it was built with a message. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not a tomb. It is a resurrection machine. Not for a single king, but for all of humanity. It stands today as a silent stone sentinel, a testament to a forgotten chapter of human history. It challenges the very foundations of our past and forces us to reconsider our future. It is a mirror reflecting our own technological arrogance and our profound spiritual amnesia. The question is no longer just how they built it. The real question, the one that should echo in our minds as we stare up at its impossible slopes, is why? Why go to such lengths? Why encode such profound knowledge? Why aim a message so far into the future? Perhaps the answer is simple. They did it because they were us, a prior iteration of humanity that reached incredible heights, only to be struck down by a cosmic cycle they could not control. And in their final act, they left a legacy of hope, a warning for their children thousands of years in the future, who they knew would one day walk the same path and face the same celestial trial. The great cosmic clock is ticking, and the final, most important question is the one we must ask ourselves. Are we finally ready to listen?